There are no words to truly capture the feeling of disbelief when someone you care about says something that leaves you questioning everything. You want to understand, to make sense of it all. But all you're left with is a knot of emotions and a heart that can't quite recover. When someone's words hit harder than you ever imagined, you're left in a state of emotional chaos. You want to respond, but you're paralyzed by the shock of it all, unsure of how to navigate the flood of emotions rushing through you. It's a strange feeling to be hit by words that come out of nowhere, leaving you wondering how your relationship got to this point. You're left feeling torn between wanting to understand and feeling betrayed by the sudden harshness of it all. The hardest part of hearing something hurtful is not just the impact of the words, but the realization that they came from someone you thought you could always trust. That betrayal, even if unintentional, can create a distance that's difficult to overcome. When words cut deeper than you thought possible, you're forced to face the reality of your emotions head on. The shock leaves you reeling, and the hurt lingers long after the words have been said. It's one thing to be hurt by someone you don't know, but when the words come from someone you trust, it's like a punch to the gut. The disbelief mixes with the hurt, leaving you in a state of emotional limbo, unsure of what to do next. Sometimes, the words we fear the most are the ones we least expect. When someone says something that shakes you to the core, you're left in a whirlwind of confusion, struggling to make sense of what's just happened. The silence that follows hurtful words is often the loudest. In that quiet space, you're left with your own thoughts, questioning everything, trying to make sense of what's just been said, and struggling to process the emotional impact. When someone speaks in a way that leaves you speechless, it's hard to know how to react. The shock of the words hits you first, and then you're left with the painful task of trying to heal from the wound they've left behind. It's amazing how one comment, one sentence, can alter the course of everything. You're left trying to understand how someone you care about can make you feel so small, so insignificant, with just a few words. Sometimes we don't realize the weight of our words until they're already out there, doing their damage. When you hear something you never thought would come from someone close to you, it's a reminder that words have power and they can wound deeply. The disbelief that follows hurtful words is almost like a haze that takes over your mind. It's hard to think clearly, to understand what just happened, and even harder to process the emotions that are bubbling up inside. When someone says something that feels like a betrayal, the silence that follows speaks volumes. you're left alone with your thoughts, trying to make sense of what's just happened and what it means for the future of your relationship. There are no easy answers when someone says something that stings. The initial shock gives way to a series of emotional waves, leaving you with more questions than answers and a heart that needs time to heal. Sometimes, the hardest thing to accept is that the words that hurt you the most came from someone you love. It's a painful realization, one that shakes the foundation of your relationship and leaves you struggling to pick up the pieces. You think you know someone, but then they say something that changes everything. The disbelief lingers, and the hurt that follows is even harder to process as you try to make sense of how things could have gotten so broken. In the aftermath of hurtful words, you're left with a deep sense of emotional exhaustion. The shock leaves you drained, unsure of how to move forward, but desperately wanting to make sense of the chaos that has just unfolded. When someone you care about speaks in a way that leaves you questioning everything, it's like your world has been flipped upside down. The disbelief and hurt intertwine, leaving you paralyzed, unable to take the first step toward healing. It's one thing to hear hurtful words from a stranger, but when they come from someone you trust, it feels like a betrayal of the highest order. The shock is overwhelming, and the emotional impact is far more intense than you could have ever imagined. The hardest part of hearing something hurtful is that it often comes without warning. You're caught off guard, unsure of how to respond, and left to deal with the aftermath of emotions that seem impossible to control. When someone says something that shakes you to your core, it's hard to know what to do next. The shock leaves you paralyzed, and the hurt lingers far longer than you ever expected. Sometimes, the weight of a single sentence can leave you speechless, questioning everything you thought you understood about the person you thought you knew so well. The shock, the hurt, and the disbelief mix together, creating a storm inside, leaving you feeling lost in the silence of your own thoughts. The power of words is often underestimated. One simple phrase, uttered in the heat of a moment, can leave a permanent mark on your heart. It's hard to understand how someone you trust can shatter your peace with just a few words, leaving you in a place of confusion and sorrow. When someone you care about says something that cuts deeper than you ever imagined, the immediate reaction is disbelief. How could they say something so harsh, so unfeeling? In that moment, your heart races, your mind spirals, and you're left wondering if you'll ever be able to look at them the same way again. The hardest part about hearing something hurtful is not just the words themselves, but the realization that they came from someone you once thought you could always count on. The shock is overwhelming, and the emotional storm that follows is hard to navigate. It's like a punch to the gut when someone you trust speaks in a way that feels foreign and cruel. The words hit you unexpectedly, and you can't help but wonder how things got to this point. You're left with a heart full of unanswered questions, trying to make sense of the chaos. When someone says something that makes you pause, questioning everything you believed about them, you're left in a state of emotional turmoil. It's as though the rug has been pulled from under you, leaving you grasping for clarity that seems just out of reach. Words have the power to break a bond that took years to build. When someone speaks in a way that cuts to the core, you are forced to confront the reality of your relationship in a new light, one that is filled with confusion, doubt, and a sense of betrayal. There are moments in life when someone's words leave you stunned, unable to fully process the weight of what's just been said. In that moment, you question everything: your relationship, your understanding of them, and your own emotional response. The silence that follows feels deafening. It's not the words themselves, but the underlying emotion behind them that hurts the most. When someone you care about says something unexpected, you're left feeling unsure of where you stand, unsure of who you are to them, and unsure of how to move forward. How do you move on from the sting of words spoken in a moment of anger or frustration? How do you rebuild the trust that's been fractured in an instant? The emotional landscape is left in ruins, and all you can do is try to find your way out of the wreckage. It's hard to comprehend the depth of someone's words when they strike unexpectedly. You try to understand their intentions, but all you're left with is the aftermath of your own thoughts and feelings, swirling in confusion and hurt. In moments like these, you find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew. It's as if a shadow has been cast over your relationship, and you're left struggling to find the light of understanding that once existed between you. The feeling that follows an unexpected, hurtful comment is a mix of disbelief, anger, and sadness. It's hard to process something so unexpected, and even harder to figure out where to go from here as you sit with your emotions, wondering how things can ever be the same. It's like a rug being pulled from under your feet when someone you trust says something so painful. You can't help but question every aspect of your relationship. The shock leaves you paralyzed, trying to process the emotional wreckage left behind. Sometimes, the words that hurt the most come from the people we least expect. When someone you love says something that takes you completely by surprise, You're left grappling with your own emotions, wondering if you'll ever feel the same way again. In the heat of the moment, words are often said without thought, but the damage they leave behind is far from fleeting. When someone speaks in a way that leaves you stunned, you're left to process the impact of those words on your heart and mind. What happens when the words you never saw coming hit you like a freight train? You feel the weight of them in your chest, and they refuse to leave. It's hard to know what to do with that kind of hurt, especially when it's unexpected. The moment you hear something that shakes you to your core, you're left trying to reconcile the image of the person you thought you knew with the reality of their words. It's a painful process, and one that often leaves you feeling emotionally naked and exposed.